Hello and welcome to Lights Out, the Formula One podcast for fans, by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage, as always, I'm joined by my co-driver slash co-host Sam. Hi Sam, how are you doing?
Hi Will, hi listeners. I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, nice to... I feel like I say this every episode, but I'm enjoying being back in front of the microphone. But it's nice to be thinking about the current F1 season. Have you enjoyed the Formula One spring break?
Yes and no, I suppose. It's been. I don't mind a break now and again. I mean, particularly since we've been doing podcasts, obviously it gives us an opportunity to talk about some things that aren't modern day Formula One or current races and stuff, which has been great. But it's been quite a long break, so I'm quite ready for a race now. I mean, as and when we get into the mix of the 10 in 14 or whatever it is, 10 races in 14 weeks, maybe I'll feel a bit differently about that long break. But yeah, it has felt quite long. How about you?
Yeah, well, I looked at the calendar earlier because it feels like it's been a month, and actually the last race was only on the 2nd of April, and we're recording this on the 20th of April. So it's, that doesn't. It feels like it's been longer than that. But yeah, no. When you'll be listening to this, it'll be race week, as we've got the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I think, is it still called the European Grand Prix? It held that title for some time, but it may still be the European Grand Prix. And I thought, as we've had a bit of a break, we've had 3 races, then we've had basically 3 weeks of no racing. I thought we could sort of take stock and sort of consider what we've learned so far of the season. I know we've only had 3 races, but I think we know some things we didn't know at the start of the season already. So I thought we'd cover that today. And so this is Lights Out, and away we go with the episode. So Sam, one of the things we've learned is the very front of the grid. And we talked about this a couple of times. Is the different concepts. What do you think we've learned so far about the different car concepts on the front of the grid, and what we didn't know at the start of the season?
That's a good question. I suppose the main thing we've learned is that the ceiling of various concepts have respectively been quite different. So we'll start with the sort of Ferrari and Mercedes concepts, which were very, very different to the Red Bull one, and indeed very different from each other. They've both improved quite significantly this season, if you look at the times that they've been posting this year versus last year. And I think there was a definite level of confidence in both those teams. So if you look at the launches of the cars and some of the things they were saying when they launched them, they were very confident that they'd gained a lot of time, and they have gained time. Unfortunately for them, they've not gained anywhere near as much time as Red Bull. And I think that probably tells those teams and the rest of the grid sort of where they are in terms of the ceilings on those concepts, because Mercedes have eliminated the porpoising problem that they suffered so much of last season. They've really taken their concept forwards and stuck to those principles. And to be fair, they did win a race towards the end of last year and were competing, but by that point the championship was long over. So there's a reason there. You can sort of understand why they've continued down that particular road, but it does feel like they've reached a real sort of end point of that particular concept. And obviously some of the language that's come out of Toto and others since the first race really has been, we've probably gone in the wrong direction here. We need to drastically change what we've been doing. Ferrari, it's a bit less obvious, I think. I mean, they haven't publicly said anything to that effect in the same way that Mercedes have. I mean, that probably says a lot about the differences between sort of Toto and Fred Vasseur and what they're willing to share, or in Fred's case, what he's not. So it's a bit of an unknown quantity, really, to know what Ferrari are actually going to do with their concept. But equally, it does look like they've reached a bit of a ceiling with it. It's very high degradation on its, it's quite hard on its tyres. That presents problems. And over one lap, it's not too bad, but still significantly behind the Red Bulls. And obviously, we've seen others like Aston Martin adopt the Red Bull concept, as it were, and move themselves really quickly up the grid. And obviously, Red Bull are in a class of their own this season. So yeah, my main takeaway from those sort of top teams really is that one concept is quite clearly much better than the others, and we'll probably see a bit of a convergence on that over the next 12, 18 months through the end of this season and into next. How about you?
No, I agree. I agree with a lot of that. I think you're right. I think they probably thought, Ferrari and Mercedes, that with the developments that they'd made over the winter, I think you're right. There was a lot of coming out of Ferrari that they really thought they were going to be, storming the championship. But I think already within 3 races, they can both see that actually the development that they've got is nowhere near to the level up above that Red Bull has reached. And so that's probably forced them to admit that, they've, like you say, they've hit that ceiling. I was thinking about it, and I wonder if I was just sort of thinking about the sort of the long term. I wonder if the win for Mercedes last year in Brazil kind of gives them a bit of like false confidence. They think, okay, like we finally got the car working, we can finally win races. If we stick with this design, we stick with this concept, we'll be challenging for more. And I generally do think they are so surprised at where they find themselves this season. And obviously I wouldn't want George to not won that race, but I would love to know if that didn't, sort of take on any of the thinking and develop any of the thinking within Mercedes at the time. I think Ferrari, there's massive pressure on them. We've talked about before, the TFOC, the Ferrari fans are desperate for them to return to championship winning ways. The Italian media are, desperate to see Ferrari well, and I think they're, from I understand from reports, that they're starting to circle a bit on the poor performance of Ferrari as well. I think, Red Bull, the car looks pretty similar to the standard fan to last season, but it just looks in a different league. I think the Aston copy of that design, to go from what they finished 7th in the championship last year to now basically be second and be really sort of fighting for you, just shows you how high that ceiling of that concept is, because it can keep, if they can go from 7th to second and basically knock off Ferrari and Mercedes from their perch, where are Aston Martin going to be at the end of the season? And the thing we have to remember is that Aston Martin, because they finished 7th in the championship, they have the most development time of those top 4 teams. So they've got the most wind tunnel time. So they can still keep developing and testing their car throughout the season much more than Red Bull can, who've been struck by the cost cap penalty as well. So I think, it could be quite, I think we predicted after the first race, I said, wouldn't it be good if, Ferrari and Mercedes with that more development time could catch up to Red Bull by the end of the season. I actually think maybe it could be the Red Bull, but just from sort of reading different comments from the different team principals and drivers, the thing is, everyone's talking about Red Bull as if they're completely untouchable. No one thinks they're even close to sort of pulling them in.
Yeah. And to some extent, I can understand why the gap is quite big. I mean, if I was Aston Martin and I had all that wind tunnel time and development time, I'd probably be focusing on thinking about what they can do with next year's car already, really. I mean, I realise it's only been 3 races, we've got another 20 to go, but the odds of them catching Red Bull to an extent this season feels quite slim. I mean, I do think they'll probably pick up maybe a win or 2 here and there, possibly. We'll see. But yeah, I think they should probably be thinking about next season, really, as I suspect most teams are. I mean, Mercedes have been pretty downbeat, haven't they, already, about the championship? I mean, they talk a good game about their upgrades for Imola, but I don't think anybody over there actually expects them to gain the amount of time that's necessary for them to get close to Red Bull.
Yeah.
And the same with Ferrari, really. I mean, they're in a different boat because they sort of half competed last season, and obviously the pressure on them is quite significant. So maybe they will look at making a greater investment in this season and trying to close the gap. But as we've alluded to on several podcasts now, it seems very unlikely anybody's going to catch Red Bull. Actually, while I mentioned Red Bull, a very good friend of mine works at Oracle, and he loves the podcast, but every time he listens, he sends me a text saying, would you please refer to them as Oracle Red Bull whilst they're good and whilst they're winning? So for the one and only time, because I will forget to do it again, Oracle Red Bull Racing are significantly further ahead. And the rest of the grids, if they aren't thinking about next season now, they probably will be quite quickly, I think, because I mean, Red Bull may have less development time, but they're still going to make improvements on that car. And who's to say those improvements are even going to be necessary, because they've been slowing their drivers down already the last few races and still been miles ahead. So, I think they've got plenty more in the tank.
Yeah, I also think as well there'll be a wider sort of question, sort of just of Formula One, with the development of sort of development race this season of the cost cap penalty on Oracle Red Bull Racing, because at the time I think some people sort of felt that wasn't a harsh enough penalty, and if I think it's going to be very hard to see what effect that cost cap penalty has on Red Bull, because they are so far ahead. So unless the car goes backwards, I think actually it's we won't really get to sort of we won't get the effect of that cost cap penalty, and that's something that Formula One do need to address, because they've obviously brought in these penalties for breaching the cost cap, and if one team is so dominant and they don't need they don't need the extra development time, they're fine without it, it's not a very good penalty, really. You just got to basically, in theory, you could just spend all the money in the world developing your car, take the penalty, and then because your car is untouchable, you're fine. You don't really feel the effects of a reduced wind time compared to your competitors.
Yeah, that's true. Although at least I'll give the FIA a very small amount of credit here. At least they do have an option around like the significant amount that's overspent. I mean, the overspend with Red Bull was about 400k, wasn't it, last year? Who knows what will be this year? The rumor is there's lots of teams that have overspent this year, so we'll see what happens with that. I doubt Stefano Domenicali is going to want to come down hard on more than half the grid if it's all of them, but maybe they will. Yes. So I think if they did look to spend an absolute fortune and significantly overspend and do it kind of willingly, then the penalties would be harsh enough that serves as a good deterrent. But you're right, as it stands at the moment, it doesn't really feel like that loss in wind tunnel times really affected them very much. They are benefited by having probably the best aerodynamicist F1's ever seen in a situation where the regulations have changed and moved to ground effect, which is massive for them. It seems like a very limited penalty, but I mean, we can re-debate whether that penalty was right or wrong, or whether it should be more harsh or not anytime. But the reality is, it's not made a huge amount of difference, has it really?
Yeah, I think the thing that's so impressive to me about the Red Bull is that the car that appears on the Saturday is nowhere near as good, or doesn't seem to be as good as the car that appears on the Sunday. So in Saturday in the qualifying, it's been close. They've not been miles and miles ahead in qualifying. They've obviously got their pole positions every race, but on the Sunday they're just looking at just the way it manages those tires. It just flies away. Whereas we know some of the other teams around them really struggling with their sort of tire degradation, so their tire wear. That for me, I think, is what's quite strange to see, really, because I think back to sort of some Mercedes dominance. They were clearly the best car in qualifying, and they were clearly the best car in the race. Whereas sometimes we've seen others get quite close. I think it was in Australia, George and Lewis started second and third. They weren't actually that. I think comparing pole times, weren't actually that far off in qualifying. So it's quite interesting to see. But then to see such a dominant race car is quite an impressive feat of engineering.
It is. Yeah.
And so bringing the sort of the concept ceilings back down to the track, what do you sort of make of the championship battle? Max has currently got a 15-point lead already ahead of his teammate Checo. What are your sort of early reflections on and what have you learned on the title battle from these three races?
I don't know if we've necessarily learned anything we didn't know. I mean, Max is very good, obviously. I mean, he had a great season last year, had a great season the year before that. He's clearly an outstanding driver, driving an outstanding car, and that's kind of an end of it, really. I mean, there's not much else to say about that particular partnership. It's just working so well, and the car is designed seemingly perfectly for Max, like it really suits his driving style. And equally, they've just got the design of the car, I don't want to say perfect, because I'm sure there's people in Red Bull desperately trying to make the thing quicker, but it's just the way that, like, the whole philosophy of that car is just perfect for modern day Formula One. It generates loads of downforce, so it's quick through the corners, but it doesn't cause them a huge amount of drag on the straights as it is. And everything they've built, everything they've sort of, the way they've structured the car around the rear suspension and the beam wing and the rest of it, really makes it effective in DRS as well, as we've seen several times now, where they just breeze past whoever they're trying to get by. So yeah, it's really hard to envisage any team getting anywhere close to them for a little while. I mean, I'm hopeful that sort of in the second half of the season, maybe we'll see some other teams get a bit closer, and there will be tracks that don't necessarily favour Red Bull, say like your Monacos and Hungaries and places where the tracks are a little bit different, and sort of overarching top speed, straight line speed, and the use of DRS aren't necessarily a massive factor. Maybe we'll see some variance and we'll see some other drivers come into the mix for wins there, but over the course of a season, yeah, I mean, I dread to think what the points deficit is going to be between the two Red Bull drivers and everybody else, but it's going to be massive.
Yeah.
How about you? Have you thought? Do you have any hope for anything beyond?
I think what I'm hoping for, and sort of what we need for a title battle, is some max unreliability, just so Checo can close the gap. Because I think that seems to be the only way that Checo is going to be able to close that gap, and otherwise, I think it's just going to keep growing and growing. And if it's consecutive 1-2s and Max is always finishing first, I think that gap will just slowly build to where it's, it becomes quite quickly where it's just he just can never reach it. So, we saw early on when in Saudi Arabia with Max having unreliability problems, and that gave Checo the opportunity. Checo's got to be driving well to sort of take this opportunity so there can be a title battle. Otherwise, I think I think we can basically predict now that Max had already won the World Championship.
Hmm.
What I'm hoping, I'm going to do a football analogy. You might not like this, and this is not confirmed yet. But what I'm hoping for is for Red Bull to do an Arsenal and to be really good all season, and then just at the crucial period, just bottle it and throw it away. I know that's a bit harsh for you as an Arsenal fan, but I saw an opportunity, I saw a comparison, so I thought I had to make it. So sorry, but not sorry.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I hold out some hope in the sense that the gap in the final, I don't know, 7 or 8 races is going to be so significant that Red Bull could probably still bin the cars in most sessions and still find a way to win the championship. But yeah, thanks very much. Or maybe Red Bull will do a Man City and overspend and be kicked out of the sport.
Well, yeah, that could happen. That could happen. Oh, very good, very good. And I suppose we've touched on them a little bit, but I suppose there's one person we need to really single out and sort of who has both surprised us both. I think we're not a massive fan of this person, but has sort of had a really strong start to the season. Seems to be absolutely loving life, and that man is 41-year-old Fernando Alonso. He is having the time of his life in that Aston Martin. What do you make of his start to the season?
Yeah, he's had a fantastic start. He's very, very happy, isn't he? Really, it's kind of he's just beaming every time he pops up on the telly. Really, so, and you can understand why. I mean, some of the cars he's had to drive the last 5, 6, 7 years haven't been great. So, yeah, he's seemingly really enjoying it. I suppose the big thing is, I think it says a lot about the longevity he has that he's still able to do what he's doing at the moment, because it's not like he's driving an absolute rocket ship that doesn't require much wheel-to-wheel racing or tactical thinking or just driving at speed. Like he's still really very good, I think. I mean, he obviously put a great move on Hamilton. That was in Bahrain, wasn't it, rather than Saudi? I think it was Bahrain, first race. And he's had some really good like wheel-to-wheel racing to date against, and in his case, a lot younger drivers who probably would consider themselves to be ahead of him, but they're not. And I think that's been a really interesting element this season, where we've seen a sort of resurgent Fernando Alonso in a car that he's very happy in, driving the wheels off it and having a lovely old time, basically. So
he did say it was a lovely car to drive halfway through the first race, which is, I think, will be one of the quotes of the season.
Yes, yeah, no, he does seem very pleased, doesn't he? And and he's got a good setup there as well. I think he knows he's racing against a teammate that's not likely to beat him over the course of a season, really. I mean, Stroll's doing a good job, but he's not going to beat Fernando Alonso. And maybe there's an opportunity, and you've predicted him to win a race. I think there is a good opportunity for him to win a race this year. At some point, he will, I think, have a chance. And based on what we've seen so far from the first 3 races, still the same old Fernando that he was back when he was winning races every other week. So, yeah, I fancy him to pick one up at this point.
It's quite funny because when he was at Alpine, the whole sort of like social media thing was L Plan, and like I remember going to some of the races and seeing like Alpine fans and Alonso fans wearing like L Plan merchandise, and that was a big thing. And then when he joined Aston Martin, it became the Mission, which I thought was quite good for the James Bond sort of links. But now there's something called like, I think it's like 33 Como, and it's like it's all about him chasing win number 33, which obviously also incidentally is Max Verstappen's number. And I think it was, I don't know which, this name escapes me, but a Spanish tennis player won a game, quite a big game recently, and at the end of the game he went over to the camera, got his Sharpie out and signed like 33 question mark, and everyone's like, oh, like all the Spanish sort of sporting stars and fans are like really hoping he can get to win number 33. And do you know what I found out? Well, there's 2 things. I found out that the last time Fernando Alonso won was in 2013 at the Spanish Grand Prix, so 10 years ago. And imagine if he won it back there this year, that would be quite, the scenes in Spain would be amazing. But also, this also really surprised me. He's the first Spanish driver to win a race.
Whatever.
Yeah. In Formula One. Yeah. I naively thought there might have been other Spanish drivers in the years before, but apparently so.
Yeah.
I read that, and that was from a trusted source. It wasn't.
No, I believe you. I'm not sat here thinking of drivers thinking, oh, yeah, they must have won. But no, that's a good, and that's a good record to have as well, because no one can take that off you.
Yeah, but he does seem very like happy, very relaxed, and just very confident. And that's the thing we've not really seen from Alonso in probably the McLaren days. When he went back to McLaren, he was very public about how awful that car was, saying it was basically like driving a Formula 2 car. And Alpine never seemed fully happy there. Obviously, the car was semi-competitive, but he never achieved anything great there. And then now to sort of find himself shot up the grid. But also, I think he must absolutely love having Stroll as a teammate, because Stroll just turns up every weekend, doesn't really say anything, doesn't really have a profile, just plods along. So he must love it, just knowing that he's going to go into qualifying and doesn't have to fight his teammate because he's basically just there because his dad's paid for him to have a nice jolly in a nice Formula One car.
I'm willing to bet, however, so I'm not suggesting that Fernando Alonso really is just an unpleasant person, but I do expect some point in the season for there to be flashpoints, not necessarily with Stroll, but with other drivers, because the longer the season goes, the more pressure will build on Alonso and Aston Martin to win a race, because everyone will expect them to now, right? They are probably the second or third quickest car on the grid. At some point, it's not going to work out for Oracle Red Bull Racing, and Aston Martin should be the team that are there to capitalise. So, and if they miss out on a couple of opportunities, there will be some pressure building there, and at some point, I'm quite confident we will see a vintage Fernando Alonso radio message and some anger that directed at someone or something, probably.
I can see that happening as well. And I also wonder if that Aston Martin. So say I think I get the sense that in Fernando Alonso's head, I think he thinks they'll have a strong year this year, and the next year he'll be fighting for the championship. If that project kind of fizzles out, I can also see him throwing his toys out the pram a bit as well. And I think you're right. If he doesn't get the win, I think he will be quite frustrated. And I think he'll be frustrated, but also it'll be a very interesting dynamic for the team, because Lawrence Stroll will be desperate for that first win under his ownership, and he spent so much money into the Formula One team and into Aston Martin as a brand that he probably needs a win to sort of help with the general car sales brand, but also to sort of justify the expenditure. It'll be a really fascinating one to watch. I think how Aston Martin do and how Alonso does as well, because I think it's the unexpected story of the season. No one really saw them turning up like this, but and then also sort of Alonso, like you say, being the star of the season probably so far and having so much hype and attention, and him absolutely like reveling in it. It's going to be fascinating. I thought before we went to a break, I just thought it'd be a good thing to sort of stop and take hold of was where we were at with the Latifis. So if you've missed our race episodes, the Latifis are our way of awarding someone every weekend for their stupidity or their idiotic, like something doing idiotic or just silly. So far, the FIA have won 2. Sky's graphics department have won 1 for angering Sam with their terrible graphics every time there's a change in lead,
and the sound,
and the sound as well, and the sound.
Yep.
Can't forget that. And then Esteban Ocon, Hulkenberg, or shall I say Hulkenberg, as Daniel Ricciardo does brilliantly, and Alex Albon all share 1. So I think we could have probably predicted the FIA would be on the most when we started the season. So that's good to see that they're true to form. But it's still quite even so far on the drivers. No one's had a shocker repeatedly yet. So we'll keep an eye on that as the season goes on, and maybe when we get to the summer break, we'll take stock and sort of see where we're at with the Latifis. But I thought helpful just to sort of take an early reflection, and that's an early learning just to see where we're at, and fingers crossed the FIA they don't end up with any more.
They will end up with more.
And with that, we'll take a quick break. Hello and welcome back from the break. We hope you had a jolly old time. We had a very jolly time here. So Sam, we talked about the front of the grid. Now I think we should cover the rest of the grid. And when I say the rest of the grid, I mean everyone, because it really is. I've just dubbed this the midfield jumble. It is all over the place. I think if you exclude Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes and Red Bull, everyone below that, the remaining 6 teams of that, it's a complete. I really couldn't tell you who's the best and who's the worst, because we've had a real range of results and a real range of performances from all those drivers in those teams. What do you make of the midfield jumble so far?
Yeah, it's weird season, isn't it? Normally you have a team or two that are dreadful,
Mm,
and this season it feels like we've got a really large like milieu of average across
yeah,
like the majority of the grid. Because I think even I mean the cars. I mean, there's a couple of outs. I mean, I'm thinking about how many realistically, how many actual like outstanding drivers are there? I mean, maybe Ocon and maybe Norris are in the conversation, but
maybe Gasly.
maybe Gasly. I don't know. He's never really done it. I don't think a team that's anywhere further up the midfield. So, um, yeah, I think even like you look at the cars and you look at the drivers, it is a bit meh, isn't it, from sort of fifth downwards? So
Yeah, and I think as well. Also, you usually have like one team that is very much fifth, or like you'll have two teams going for fifth and sixth, and then you'll have like you always have one team that is 10th.
yeah,
That is just the slowest car. We've had the Haas period, we've had the Williams period. They usually take it in turns, but actually this year, no one seems to want to be the clear back mark or the one that you just know. Well, they're going to be last or that. And maybe Williams, it's not because partly because they've got a good car, but also because they've got rid of our good friend Nicholas Latifi. But
mm.
it is quite fascinating to sort of see a really interchangeable midfield.
Yeah, it has, and that may well result in some quite interesting racing throughout the season because they are all very evenly matched, and I think there'll be definitely sort of differences between the cars and stuff depending on what tracks they're at. So there are some different designs and concepts there. So yeah, it could make for quite an interesting midfield battle. I think either way, whoever ends up finishing last can probably consider themselves a little bit unlucky to finish last, really, already at the moment. I mean, we'll see what happens with development, and as I've mentioned a few times on this podcast, we really want Williams to do well, and that's why making the most of this kind of brief period that they have at the moment, where they're seemingly one of the quicker teams in that six potentially. They need to make the most of it and earn the points that they can get because they will be outdeveloped by some of the bigger teams with bigger budgets that are in the mix too. So yeah, it could well be an interesting midfield battle, sort of late in the season. But yeah, for the moment, I don't want to say like making up the numbers. That's extremely derogatory about a lot of unbelievably fast cars and great teams and great drivers. But that is how it feels a little bit. We haven't seen a huge amount from a lot of those teams, and yeah, I mean, apart from Australia where we saw a bit of carnage because of how the race was run. Yeah, the midfield battle's not been sort of what it was last year because we had a really, obviously a really feisty battle between Alpine and McLaren last year, and I'm kind of hopeful we maybe get something like that similar to this year. May well be involving those two teams again potentially, but yeah, so far it's been yeah, average, I suppose.
Am I correct in thinking that the gap between first and last is smaller this year
Yeah,
compared to
that's
last
right.
year?
Yeah,
So the field is bunching up, which is what they were aiming to happen. So that's encouraging. But you're right, no one's really like the field's still pretty. There is a clear divide of those are at the front and those are at the back slash midfield. Um,
yeah, and this.
Sorry,
I
you
was
go.
just saying this may well be the beginning, and I can't believe I might be doing this twice in one podcast, giving the FIA some credit. Yikes! Is that right? Should I do that? I'm not sure. I should. I feel dirty.
Go on.
Um, this could be the beginning of the sort of long term strategy around the changes to the cost cap and the changes to how development time is assigned. Because
Yeah.
we're seeing these teams bunch up. It's not like the top three teams can go and spend 300 million quid every year and just outdevelop everybody else by miles. That's been taken away. So we could naturally see this sort of bunching up of the grid, and hopefully it results in some other teams potentially bringing themselves into the mix. But yeah, that would be giving the FIA far too much credit for the time being, and twice in one podcast doesn't feel right. So we'll hold judgment on that, but it could be a symptom of that.
Yeah, and I've already predicted that the 2024 grid is just going to be every car identical to the Red Bull. So if everyone copies that principle, yeah, everyone I think will be very competitive. But yeah, and also probably for the FIA as well and Formula One, like seeing Aston Martin go from being 7th in the championship last year to 2nd or 3rd, that's exactly what they want to see. And so, I imagine lots of other teams now are quickly looking around thinking like, right, let's focus on 2024. Let's move to the Red Bull concept. And how do we have a big jump like they've done? Because it's shown that it is possible as well. I mean, one of the team that we did write off after the first couple of races because they did have a woeful start to the season was McLaren. But actually, the result in Australia, they really, like you said, they really capitalised on what happened and the chaos, and both drivers came away with points. That's taken them from being, was it 10th to now they're 6th in the championship.
Yep.
Obviously with Alpine taking each other out as well, they're very much in the mix as well. It's encouraging to see out, McLaren not be the last team and be that sort of, clear back marker like the Williams and Haas of previous years.
Yeah, no, they've definitely made the most of the opportunities presented to them, and they're bringing a big upgrade package, aren't they? I don't think it's to, maybe it's to Baku. No, it's not to Baku, but they've got one coming either in the race after Baku.
That's the one that they basically said they should have started the season with, and that's basically how bad the development was. They've had to wait 5 races for their development. But also, I've seen as well that McLaren, they've sacked most of their technical team that have been in charge of the development of this year's car, and they've built they've hired a few new people, but they've got like a new committee to sort of design and develop their car. And it's interesting because when Zach Brown became the team principal, that was one of the first things he did, was sort of put in a new structure, and it was obviously going well. But obviously, I wonder what's happened behind closed doors that has then meant they've had to sack the people they brought in and sort of go for a different approach.
Yeah, so we don't have to go into a huge amount of detail about it, but the way McLaren structured themselves, and Red Bull, I know we shouldn't use them as an example every time because they've obviously done such a great job, but the way those two teams structure development of the car was very different. So McLaren sort of had quite big, what do you call it? Pillars, I suppose. They had the kind of mechanical development, the aerodynamic development, the overall concept of the car, and they were all different teams headed by different people. And it's fair to say that I think Zach Brown's view, and some of those in working McLaren's views, was that wasn't necessarily conducive to the development of a good concept. Whereas you look at what Red Bull have done, everything's basically done under Adrian Newey. He's not just the aerodynamicist; he's the guy, like he's the chief technical officer. And lots of other people work for him, and they all work collaboratively to develop the concept. And you've got the mechanical people trying to work out how to make the concept work, rather than the mechanical people working out the mechanics of it, and then them trying to make it work later on, like putting the pieces of the jigsaw together. So that's apparently the sort of structural change they've tried to make, which sounds probably good. And then the upgrades we'll see. But no, they've definitely made the most of the opportunities that have been presented to them so far. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them near the back again in Baku. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. That also is a race that famously has resulted in a lot of safety cars and incidents, and who knows what else. So there'll probably be opportunities there for them too. But it's going to be interesting.
And at least McLaren, they can feel confident. They've probably got 2 of the best drivers of that group of teams. I don't think they'd pick any one of the other drivers, and they've got their drivers locked in on very tight, long contracts as well. So I'm saying that wouldn't surprise me if Lando Norris somehow got a massive payout of his deal and went off to somewhere else at the end of the season. But they've got 2 good drivers that can really capitalise that. Whereas I think take it for example Williams. I would have previously said Albon is a pretty reliable, good driver, but actually he was pretty all over the place and got a Latifi in our last post race episode as well. So I think it's gonna be interesting. Just before we move away from the drivers, because I know there's one other area where we want to sort of talk about that we've learned about this season, is I just want to sort of get your view on who of the drivers do you think has started well across the whole grid, and who do you think has had a bad start to the season? If you pick it to one for each.
Okay, I'll pick Hulkenberg for the one who started well.
Nice.
So you come back to Formula One from a brief hiatus away. Well, I say that. I mean, he was sacked wrongly in many people's eyes, and lost his seat. And he's come back and still basically got all the same old Nico Hulkenberg traits. Drives the car very, very fast, qualifies well, and often finishes in the points. And he finds himself 9th in the championship at the moment. He's got 6 points already.
He's a charming bloke. Lando.
And yes, he is a charming fellow. So I think he'd be my pick for who started well. And I feel a bit mean picking his teammate, but it's probably right. K-Mac has not had a very good start to the season. No. They're driving in the same car as Hulkenberg and has been consistently out-qualified and outscored so far. So Magnussen, I'm sure, will be looking at the next few races, thinking about what he has to do to try and rein his teammate in a bit, because nobody wants to finish behind their teammate, obviously, but particularly after the great season Magnussen had with Haas last season, and with a guy coming back into the Formula One after quite a while, having not been in the sport, and also having never driven these generation of cars before. To find himself sort of significantly slower than him must be quite painful at the moment. So yeah, I don't expect Magnussen to stay down there, in 17th, whatever it is at the moment in the championship, and finishing behind his teammate every week. But yeah, he's not had a great start. How about you? Who'd be your...
Yeah, well, I was just going to say there's two things. So on Magnussen, I think he will be very nervous coming back into this because the pressure's on. But also the climate of Haas feels like they're a lot more cutthroat than they used to be. If he had a poor season, it wouldn't surprise me if Gene Haas and Gunter Stein decided to go and get someone else to be that driver. Could we have the return of Mick to Haas? Probably not. Could Danny Ricciardo go to them? Probably not. But I think they'll try something different if it's not working. And before we move away from Hulkenberg, I just want to see if you do a good Danny Rick Hulkenberg.
I'll have a go. Nico Hulkenberg.
Very good, very good. I enjoyed that. I think for me, so who started well? Who has started well? Who has started well? I would say it's a bit of an obvious answer. We covered it earlier. I would say George. We've not covered George yet today. I think George Russell has had a good start to the season. He seems quite comfortable and confident in the car, which Lewis is not. So I think he'll be buzzing off that, the fact that he's confident in the car. I think he said that it's one of the best cars he's ever driven, but bar from the one he set in when he had to step in for Hamilton. Whereas I think, compared to Hamilton, some say it's one of the worst cars he's ever driven. So, George has started well. It's looked quick. It was obviously a bit unlucky in Australia. So I think he's had a strong start. And it's a shame, really, that we're not really sort of seeing the battle between Hamilton and Russell for the championship. It's kind of like just a bit lower down the order. But I think that will be an interesting story to develop as well. And it'd be interesting to see where they end the season in the standings, but also as teammates, will they sort of start to drift? And I think you've predicted already that there's going to be some fireworks at some point, and I can see it coming because George is a very, very driven driver. I think someone who has started badly. I think Charles Leclerc has had an awful start to the season. 2 DNFs is shocking in 3 races, and I think I don't know what result he'd have to get on at the weekend, but basically he's on course to having his worst ever start to Formula 1, and that's him driving Ferrari, and he started in an Alfa Romeo Sauber. So, I do feel sorry for Charles because this time last season he'd won 2 races, and now he's been out for 2 races. He's been out 2 races. So I think we've covered this before, but he looks very frustrated. He doesn't look very happy. I think he'll be furious that they're not fighting for the championship. I think he'll feel let down by Ferrari that the fact they thought they had a championship winning car in the preseason testing and at the launch, and they're nowhere near it. I think he's not had a good start at all. Those are my picks.
Yeah, good picks. George has had a good start. I still think Lewis will beat him comfortably over the course of the season. But he has had a good start. Yeah, Charles has had an absolute shocker. I mean, Ferrari have had a pretty poor start anyway, but Charles in particular has had a bad one. I mean, losing it on the second corner, was it? I think it was second or third corner in Australia.
Second or third corner, completely beached it.
Yeah, that was pretty poor for him. Someone of his quality. He's currently level on points in the championship with Nico Hulkenberg, 2 above Valtteri Bottas. That's not really where you want your one of last year's title challengers to be, is it?
Poor bloke. And also, I think the problem with Charles Leclerc is he has such a tortured soul vibe. When things are going not his way, he just comes across like he's being he's going through hell, and he's really beating himself up. I think it was when he crashed. Was it last year in France? There was that iconic radio message where he basically screamed down the radio, and it came from the deeps and depths of his very soul. It was pretty chilling to hear, actually. Now, moving away from the drivers and the grid, I know there's one other thing we've learned, and that's DRS. Now, we covered this in the last race episode, but what have you made of DRS, and what have you learned about DRS so far this season?
Well, we've learned that I still hate it, and and if anything, I hate it more now than I did last year. And the year before that. It's it needs to be looked at. I mean, I don't expect the FIA and Formula 1 to get rid of it altogether. I think that seems very unlikely at this point. And there are definitely certain tracks where you probably need it, which is fair enough. or their perception is that they need it for the brand and for the product and for the excitement. But this season, it feels quite overpowered. They should probably have a look at it. I know certain teams have done a brilliant job and they're making the most of having DRS, like Oracle Red Bull Racing. But
is this podcast sponsored by Oracle today?
No, yeah, this will be a one-off, just one episode where I remember.
If you do want to sponsor us, Oracle, you can get in contact with our email. It's f1podcast.lightsout@gmail.com. We're open to sponsorship. Oracle is very good, I hear.
The Oracle Lights Out podcast, yeah. We'll see. No, it does. It just feels a bit overpowered. Like, I think if you're going to have it, fine, but it should not be the case that cars find it so easy to pass that there's no defense whatsoever, and the driver that's being overtaken basically gives up at the top of a straight because it's a bit boring. So yeah, I think they probably should look at it, find a way to lessen its impact, be that reduce the zones, reduce the sizes of the zones. You can't do anything on the cars at this stage, unfortunately, so it probably is the format and the structure of the lap. But yeah, I would be keen to see it reduced in power a little bit. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking then as you're talking, one thing I'd be quite intrigued to see is if they did like a weekend of a sprint race where the sprint race they had DRS and then the main race they didn't have DRS, and just to see how many different, like what the different level of overtaking is, because and hopefully that may people a bit more adventurous in sprint races because they know, right, this main opportunity, I've got really clear tools at my disposal, which I won't have at the race. And I would just be interested to see what the drop off in the amount of overtakes and what those overtaking opportunities are like without DRS over a race. Just because I think you say it's sadly moved into a place where it's like it's too overpowering, and if you're the defending driver, you're basically defenseless. You need a miracle. You need the other driver to misjudge it, or you don't really have anything to really battle them with speed wise because you just don't have that advantage that the other driver's got. So yeah, I really hope that Formula One have kind of clocked onto it and sort of start to review it, because it would be one of those awful things if they just left it for a couple of years and it sort of ruined the products and ruined the racing to the point where you're like, well, this is not that interesting anymore, because you could predict an overtake. Because that basically at its heart, right, overtaking is a great thing to watch because you don't know how it's going to unfold. It's a real battle. It's a real duel there and there in the moment.
Yeah.
And when that's sort of one-sided, it's a bit. I don't know. It's not quite the same, really. It's a bit like someone taking a penalty and they get some sort of advantage when they take a penalty in a game of football.
Yeah.
It just makes it they always score. It just they need to look at it. And I think we've seen it in several different scenarios so far in this season that show that it needs fixing or addressing quite quickly.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I think that summarizes all the things we've learned so far. Now we usually predict the winner of every race, and I think we'll do it quickly now, but we'll come on to something else. So Sam, before we come on to our new something else, on our new feature, who do you think is going to win the race?
Max Verstappen. Who do you think is going to win the race?
Me too. Right, cool. So there we go. We've done that. So to combat this procession of predictions, we've come up with a new game and a new predictions game, and I'll hand over to the innovator of this. Sam, over to you for the predictions game, which could be, if Oracle are looking to sponsor, they could sponsor the Oracle predictions. That's a good tie-in.
Yes.
But I'll hand over to you to explain to the listener what our new predictions game is.
Thanks, Will. So yeah, as you've alluded to, I think both of us will be getting to the point where we just predict a Red Bull car to win every week. I mean, I had 1 week where I didn't predict it was Max, and it was Checo. It went well, but it felt like very much an outlier. Like that's not going to happen very often this year. So we thought, well, let's spice things up a bit and make it a bit of a competition between us. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a random. So the premise is each of us will get 3 drivers every race weekend, and we have to predict where we think those 3 drivers are going to finish according to the final race classification on Sunday. The reason I'm saying the final race classification on Sunday is because, as we know, the FIA are a joke and things change, right? Hours after the race.
What's your cut-off period?
I feel like by the time we record the podcast,
okay, so
right,
the next day
on a Monday night, the following day, whatever the order is, when we record our podcast Monday night, That's the order that we're working to.
Watch it be Baku, the first race we do this, and they change the result the morning after.
I know, and then I'll have to go
Tuesday.
back and update my spreadsheet and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Yes, no, but I think we'll stick to it. Whatever's the case, whatever's true on Monday is our truth in this podcast.
Nice.
So, and rather than us picking the drivers that we're going to predict for, I'm going to use a number randomizer on my phone.
Ooh, so it will change every week.
Yes, it will.
Ooh, I like this. This.
And it's between 1 and 20, and the 1 and 20 will correspond with the drivers in their current order in the World Drivers' Championship. So every week that will change as well. So currently, some drivers are one number, and they may be a different number by the time we get to the next race. So yeah, that's the way we'll work it. So I have already done the number randomizing for us.
Very organized.
So for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, you have to predict the final positions of the driver in second currently, which is Sergio Perez.
Right.
The driver in 13th, which is Oscar Piastri.
Ooh.
And the driver in 5th, which is Carlos Sainz. So I'll give you a little second to think about that, and then we'll do mine.
So where they'll finish in the race? Well, okay, so Checo is easy one. Checo will finish second.
Okay.
I do know that Checo is very, very good at Azerbaijan. I think he's won it twice, but he's been on the podium several times. I know that.
Yeah.
So I'm going for second because I just think Max will ride off into the sunset and be fine. Piastri, where will he finish? So he finished in the points in Australia, and that was because Australia was crazy. Baku could be crazy. I'm going to go Piastri's going to finish 7th.
Oh, go on, Oscar. Okay, yeah, locked in. What about Carlos? Carlos Sainz.
Carlos. Sorry, that was my terrible Zach Brown impression.
He's 5th in the championship at the moment, if that's of any help.
I think he will finish. I almost said 7th, and then I realised that was for Piastri. I reckon he'll finish 6th.
Okay, all right.
I feel like I actually feel like I've made an error with Piastri.
So you've got 3 relatively decent drivers, all performing quite well and finishing the points. So there is that. So at least you're going to be quite supportive, I think, of those drivers in the race, because you're obviously going to want them all to finish in the points.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask if I could change, but that feels like it goes against the.
No, they're locked in. I
once
can't use the words locked in and then unlock them.
Yeah, fair enough. You've locked them and thrown away the key. Who have you predicted?
So
who have you got? Sorry,
I got a slightly different roster to you. I got number 17, which is I actually got 2 of the 3 drivers we've spoken about a lot. Number 17, which is Kevin Magnussen.
Nice.
Number 19, which is Logan Sargent.
Ooh.
And number 10, which is Charles Leclerc.
Ooh, this is good. You got a good range there.
I do.
All quite low in the championship at the standings, but you've got a good range of results to pick from. And I'm very intrigued to see what you go for Charles Leclerc, because going off form, there's an easy answer, but I don't think you're going to pick that.
No. So for K-Mag, I'm going to go, he's just going to miss out on the points in 11th. I feel like Baku could be a crazy race and he'll get quite close, but the Haas isn't very good. He's not in great form. If anyone in the Haas is going to finish the points, it's Hulkenberg. And yeah, I think K-Mag will get close but not make it.
Nice.
Logan, 19th. Don't think he's going to have a great race. And I think Baku as well, for a driver who's new to the grid, that is a tough circuit.
Yeah.
It'll be his first time driving in a Formula 1 car, and it'll be a tough ask, I think. So yeah, I'm going 19th to him. He's going to have a tough weekend. And Charles, I've gone for 5th.
Ooh, so you think he's going to have quite a strong bounce back weekend?
I think he will. Yeah, he will beat at least one Aston Martin or Mercedes, I think, and finish in the points and get 5th place. So there we go.
I mean, if Charles Leclerc is listening right now, I think he'll be quite happy with that, considering how his season started. I think he would take a 5th place. If you would, Charles, just let us know, and keen for your views on this. But yeah,
give us a retweet.
yeah. Quote tweet us.
Good stuff.
Oh, very good. And so we'll get points based on.
Oh yes, I should explain that, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
So you will be given a point for every position away from your prediction they have finished,
right.
And the person with the lowest score at the end of each race weekend wins.
So points are bad.
Correct.
Cool. And are we going to keep a running tally over the season?
Absolutely.
Oh, very good.
Oh
Very
yes,
good.
I'll have a spreadsheet and everything.
I'm not very optimistic now. No, the more I think about that, giving Piastri 7th, I'm not optimistic at all. That's a good idea. But I feel like I could very quickly be, like 20 points behind you. The gap between you and I could be as big after this first race as it is between Charles Leclerc, between Perez and Verstappen right now.
Yeah. So the reason I'm relatively confident about this weekend, and sorry to say this in advance, but you've got Checo, and basically, if he has a DNF, you're gonna rack up 18 points or something quite quickly. So I'm not suggesting that's what will happen, but he's racing against Max. It's quite possible that kind of thing could happen. So yeah, I think the better the driver, the greater the risk when there's a DNF or something. So it'll keep it fun.
I'm going to be watching those three so closely this weekend now. I'm not even going to be watching Mercedes. That's my team, and I'm going to end up watching everyone but Mercedes because I'm going to be so invested in everyone else. Come on, Checo.
Yeah.
Anyway,
very
good.
Hope everyone enjoys our new feature. We'll return obviously to the results and the scores after the Grand Prix at the weekend, and we'll see how we've done.
Looking forward to it.
So that brings us to an end of this episode. Thanks very much for joining us. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. Hopefully they enjoy the pod as much as Fernando Alonso enjoys Fernando Alonso. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at Lights Out Lads. On Instagram, we're at the Lights Out Pod. Will, we've got a race.
We actually have a race. We actually have a race to discuss. So next week we will be discussing the fallout of Crazy Baku. We'll be talking about our predictions and how they come off as well. We'll award some Latifis. They've been sat on the shelves waiting to be awarded. So we'll dust off 2 of those and hand those out to 2 winners. Fingers crossed it's not the FIA. Baku, as we've said several times, is a crazy circuit. We've had lots of drama, lots of safety cars, lots of crashes. So I'm touching wood right now. Let's hope we don't have an absolute snorefest for the return of Formula One after a 3-week break. And then we go on for quite a run, don't we? We have the odd gap here or there, but we've got Miami pretty soon afterwards. We've got Imola. What else have we got? I'm just going to quickly get the calendar up just to whet the appetite of what different circuits we're coming up. So we've got Baku. And then we've got the following weekend, the same weekend of the Coronation, which I think we're watching qualifying together, aren't we? So
we are.
Hopefully,
Miami, yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to Miami, just to clarify.
One day.
One day, yeah. But hopefully that's an interesting one to watch together. And hopefully it's a better weekend than it was last year. Then we've got Imola 2 weeks later. Then we finish off May with the Monaco Grand Prix. And then we start June with Spanish Grand Prix. So a good range of circuits over the next couple of weeks. So we'll be very busy handing out Latifis, predicting races, and sort of breaking down the Formula One season. So that's all from us. All the best, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.